Welcome back, everyone, to the Kriya Yoga Podcast. I'm here with the first episode of our third and what I'm going to call the infinite season with Isha Das, who's the spiritual director of the Assisi Institute in Rochester, New York. He's also a student of Roy Eugene Davis, and every year in July, myself, Isha Das, Swami Nirvanananda, and sometimes other guest presenters, we offer a week-long Kriya Yoga retreat. So during this discussion, Isha Das, Craig Bullock, and I, we're going to discuss the process of healing and mental health and how that fundamentally supports the deeper practice of Kriya Yoga for the purpose of self-realization and spiritual awareness. So thank you for being with me today.
Oh, you're welcome. And I first of all, I want to, if anybody's thinking about coming to the summer retreat and hasn't, please come. It's really a wonderful celebration, wonderful people. It's great. So that's my plug. But I like the way you said it, that mental health supports the Kriya Yoga path.
Yeah.
I think that's a nice beginning.
Yeah. And I'm curious how this conversation is going to go, because I remember when we were talking about planning the retreat, I don't think we really have different ideas, but a part of me thought we might have some different ideas on healing and yoga. And
well, if we do have different ideas, they're not contradictory, they're complementary. How's that?
Yeah.
Although we'll see.
yeah, that's true. We'll see. and if not, we will have a civil debate on it.
Yes.
So my thought on that is this, that the spiritual path, Kriya Yoga, these deeper paths of self-transformation, that it's really essential that a person actually is in a fairly balanced, healthy psychological state before they begin those processes, rather than engaging the processes to gain psychological health and well-being. That's my stance on that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay, let me start from this perspective, and I will give a direct answer. I think we all get into Kriya Yoga or any spiritual path, for the most part, at some level, because we want to avoid pain and we want to pursue happiness.
Right.
The problem with what then spirituality can devolve into for some people is an escape from themselves. So any spiritual path, and since we're talking about Kriya Yoga, it's never an escape from yourself. If you're really living it authentically, it's going to, sooner or later, you're going to have to look at yourself.
Right.
And not just your soul, or not just the Atman, but look at all levels of your psyche. That's just going to happen. Often early on in the spiritual life, when you make the commitment, there is this sort of boost that happens and you have a honeymoon period, but it never lasts. And sooner or later, whatever you have to look at in yourself, it's going to emerge.
Right.
So it's not an escape, and if anything, it's a path into reality. It's a path into truth, not just metaphysical truths, but it's an invitation to look at your psychological stuff and belief system and issues.
Right.
So it's not an escape. I don't know if I disagree with your statement. I would probably nuance it. I would say people have to have enough psychological health.
Right.
How do you define what enough is? It's slippery. I don't have an easy equation, but you have to have enough. So I'll put that in the context. If somebody comes to me, let's say, and they want to be initiated, and they have some kind of drug and alcohol problem. Well, no, you gotta get that squared away first. If you have some suicidal level of depression, you got to get that, squared away first. And on a really practical level, and sometimes I see people come to the Assisi Institute who are sweet and they're of goodwill, But when they go out in the parking lot to drive home, they're not sure their car is going to start. They're not sure if the landlord has locked them out of their apartment because they haven't paid their rent. So,
Right.
a person's life has to have some level of solidness, stability on almost every level. You don't
Right.
have to be, perfectly have a perfect level of mental health, but there has to be enough structure there in your emotions and in your life to make it work.
Yeah, there's so much there that you said that I wanted to go off of. So I'll just try to pick one of them. And when you were talking about the idea of managing one's life, if the rent's going to be paid or if the car is going to start,
Right.
well, it reminds me of the idea of brahmacharya in the first two limbs of yoga, that we have to manage our resources well.
Yes.
And if a person is going to go into yoga for the process of experiencing clearer states of consciousness and higher realities, if we haven't maintained our home, and so we're constantly worried about the roof leaking or our health. Even I know sometimes there are genetic things we can't help, but if there's a baseline of structure, then it makes it much easier for us to get a little closer to actually knowing and realizing, like what Paramahansa Yogananda knew. Like there has to be a level of energy, there has to be a level of stability for one to even be able to access those subtler states.
No, I agree. And I've been to the Mother Center in LA a lot, Yogananda's Mother Center, and I've been to Roy's place many times. And what you immediately feel is that there's a sense of order, and not
Right.
rigidity, but there's just a sense of everything has its place. Aesthetically, things are simple but beautiful all at the same time. And all of that is, I think, part of the foundation for true spiritual realization.
Right.
Sometimes what I will do with people is, obviously teach them a preliminary meditation, try to get them into a lifestyle in alignment with the yamas and the niyamas, or encourage them to study. And sometimes I will see people then over a period of time get ready for initiation,
Right.
or sometimes they can't. And usually they will disqualify themselves.
Hmm. Hmm. How so? Like, can you give me an
Well,
example?
yeah, I will do something either in their imagination, in reality, that's less than perfect, and they get angry at me, or
Right.
they meditate for a while and they don't see any immediate enlightenment results, and so they get discouraged, or just old habits, addictions, whatever, compulsions, karmic stuff just kicks in and
Right.
rules their life.
Yeah, yeah. And that's really interesting because in a way I can remember many times being at Center for Spiritual Awareness with Roy Davis, and I'd be on retreat. And while most of the time I ate a vegetarian diet, I exercised, I did all these things, sometimes being in that environment, all of a sudden I thought to myself, oh man, I'd really like to go eat some greasy food, or I want a donut and some coffee, or yeah, like I started to want things that weren't really in my awareness. And sometimes I think that when we start to access deeper states of our experience and our consciousness, these things come up, and we have to be aware of that and maybe look at that as an opportunity to see where we need to grow and change rather than to give into it, if we can have that level of
Yeah.
awareness.
Well, I like where you're going, where I think you're going with that, because that's where I wanted to kind of dive into. I think there is, again, a notion of I'm going to meditate and then I'm just going to transcend everything. And there's a level of reality. We do transcend moods after a while, etc. But the consciousness not only expands this way, it expands this way.
Right.
And if you, my own experience in working with people, if you meditate long enough over time, whatever the knots are inside of you, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually, they come up.
Right.
I remember I was probably a year into my Kriya practice many, many years ago, but meditating, and all of a sudden, for no particular reason, finding myself angry.
Right.
And I had to, what I eventually came to, that anger was always percolating there.
Mhm.
But because I was in the stillness and because I was moving towards some level of self-realization, it was emerging into my, it was emerging into my awareness.
Right.
And I had to deal with it without judging myself, but also be curious about it and what's the wisest way to deal with it. So it's, I'll say it this way. I like this metaphor. When the light shines in to our being, not only does it reveal that the Atman, that divinity that is our deeper self, it shines its light on all the shadows along the way.
Right.
And you have to deal with them. There's no escape from them.
Right.
Now, what the meditation practice does is it creates some level of psychological stability, so you can view them with some distance and with some compassion. You can walk through the discomfort without being debilitated by it, but it doesn't take it away. Devotion to the teacher can give you a sense of security and stability, but it doesn't take that process of walking through the shadows away.
Right. Yeah. And you brought up two very good points there. Number one, kind of what you're describing as you got into the practice, you then became aware of anger. Well,
Yes.
I'm sure many can relate to that. There are many things that came
Yes.
up for me. And it wasn't just in the first year, it was at year 12, it was at year
Yes.
15, it was at year 20. But the beautiful thing is continuing to walk on the path and the process, like you mentioned, there was a greater awareness of not that I am failing or not, oh, geez, shouldn't I be done right now? It was more of a sense of, well, the light is shining in more places, which means it's telling me I need to look over here and work on this. Right.
Absolutely. I'll share again. I've been doing Kriya Yoga. I'll be 70 in December. I've been doing it since I was 32-ish.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, this past February, I went to India. And the first week there, this was even before we got to the Kumbh Mela, we were in Puri, and I got sick. And I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I was hacking and had a fever. And I went to wash my face in the sink and a big cockroach ran across the sink. Well, what came up was, and it surprised me, because if you would have asked me before India, am I afraid of dying? I would have said no. All of a sudden, this fear came up, like, what if I die here?
Right.
I knew at one level it was irrational, but it's emotion. What if I die here? I'm not with my wife. I'm not ready to die. And it was like, wow, I had to face the fact that I still had a fear, not a fear of what was going to happen afterwards, but a fear of, well, what if I do die now?
Right.
And it was really an opportunity to look at that and to work through it at a deeper level.
Right.
And
And
it's not
that's,
done yet. It's not. I'm still going on.
oh, right. Absolutely. But it's neat. I mean, well, I'm not, I don't wish that you had to face that, but in the Yoga Sutras, like the kleshas, the things that we have to grow through, the last one is, I believe the term is abhinivesha, which means the will to live.
Yeah.
And what's neat in that whole process in the Yoga Sutras is they go usually in the order in which you have to face the things.
Yes.
And so,
Well, it was interesting you say that, because the only way I literally had not an anxiety attack, that'd be way over, but I had this panic,
yeah,
which I don't often experience. And my only way through it was, okay, if I'm meant to die in India, this is a good, I mean, that I surrender. If I'm
right,
meant to die in India, not a bad place to die, actually.
right, right,
It was like, okay, I got to give that up too.
right. And your process, having been engaged in Kriya Yoga as long as you have, if you had, I don't know if this is true or not, we can only speculate, but if you hadn't been on the spiritual path, if you hadn't been engaged in it, more than likely that fear might have been quite a bit more psychologically overwhelming than it was because of your insight and because of your practice and things that you've learned along the way.
No, absolutely. Either I would have went into some kind of massive rationalization, or maybe I would have hopped on a plane home. Who knows?
Right.
But no, every time we meditate, I think whether we have a pleasant experience or not, we access that, what I call that divine spark, who we really are. And it builds a little bit of momentum, so that when these other issues arise, it's like you have the strength, the compassion, the witnessing capacity to not be crushed by them,
Right.
and to be curious and to work through them.
Right. Right. One other thing that you mentioned that I thought was worth talking about, or many things, but this one in particular, before we got on the call, I was talking to you about this workbook I was working on, like a workbook for Kriya Yoga representatives in the tradition, those who serve as representatives. And at the point I'm at right now, I'm talking about the relationship between the teacher and the student. And you had mentioned, how devotion to a teacher or a tradition can be very stabilizing. And I think it's important to recognize that in the Kriya Yoga tradition and spiritual traditions, the tradition, the connection between teacher and student, that plays a very profound role, because you get to benefit from the state of consciousness, the experience of the teacher. So how have you found that to be healing or helpful, in your own life, or as you've witnessed it in others?
Well, no, it has been profoundly helpful in my own life, partly because, as you know, I kind of have a bhakti streak.
You? No.
I have a bhakti streak. And also, I had, growing up, a difficult childhood, and, there were some abandonment issues that I had.
Yeah.
So, and I've had, as you know, two teachers in the body that have had a big impact on Roy Eugene Davis and Richard Rohr, the Franciscan priest. But I'll just focus on Roy. And Roy always walked this fine line, because he would never infantilize me. He would
Right.
never baby me, He
Right.
would never indulge my infantile, needs, so to speak. But he was always there,
Mm-hmm.
and almost always answered my emails. I mean, might be a short response like yes, no, but he was there, number one. Number two, I would frequently, when he was alive, go out to his place in Georgia, and there was never a time that when I was in his presence that I didn't feel elevated.
Right.
So I know this is funny, but sometimes just the thought of Roy, it kind of gave me some strength. I can't explain that.
Right.
And I'll tell one funny story, because, Roy didn't go in for uh, fakes, low level supernatural phenomenon.
Right.
And one morning, when in my morning meditation, I actually felt like I was there in the temple with a group. I mean, I actually felt like I was there. So I wrote Roy an email, but the way I parsed my words, it was, I'm not saying I was there, Roy. I'm just saying I felt like I was there and I could feel the energy. And he surprised me, because he wrote back and said, well, perhaps you were here. But even that kind of connection to the place, to him, do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. Even now, and I try to talk about this on retreats, uh, that if I just stop and just remember being with Roy, just like sitting beside him while we were drinking tea, or sitting in the front row at the retreat center while he was talking, if I just stop and put myself back there, I feel that exact same sense.
Yes.
And I think, or no, I don't think, I feel that I know that what a tradition does, and what a lineage of teachers does, hopefully, ideally, is each link in that chain has worked on themselves enough that they're so bright with sattva, so bright with illumination, that the thought of them, the reading of their books, and that's probably why Autobiography of a Yogi is so potent when people read it. Like, and Roy would talk about this. He was very big on having written, like, the Truth Journal or his written books around, and he would kind of imply that there's an energy in it. and because it's related to the being of the person that it's coming from.
Well, let me say this, and I hope it's not what I call California foo-foo, but it's really the same thing I think that you're saying.
Yeah.
Whether it's, in fact, this is an aside. I didn't even know I had this. One of Roy's first books. It's on imagination,
Okay.
and you can't have it. I'm going to keep this one. I really like
Okay.
it. But this is my point. When I read Roy and when I read Yogananda, again, I want to be very precise in my speech. I do think there's a level of grace or Shakti in the words themselves.
Right.
And I think there's a stream of consciousness that I tap into, that is bigger than me, and it helps to sustain me.
Mhm.
And the way I like to say it in my own kind of metaphorical way is, the more I read Roy, Yogananda, and a few other people that really have had an influence on me. And I actually think you can do this through books. And I don't mean, Roy's sitting next to me in the chair as I'm reading
Right.
him. I don't mean that. But there is a friendship that develops with their stream of consciousness.
Right.
And since I think they spoke with, pure wisdom, then there's almost like a Vulcan mind melt that you find yourself thinking like Roy would think, or Yogananda, etc.
Right.
It just, there's this connection that also emotionally helps to stabilize you in all the other ways that we're talking about.
Right. Well, just to go a little out in a metaphysical jaunt, you know, this idea of Om and Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, he talks about contemplating Om, and that Om is the speech of Ishvar, or the speech of God, and that by contemplating that is the teacher of even the ancients. And what we do as yogis, as we attune to Om, or as we intend to attune to the field of divinity, we plug into that field that they were plugged into. And so it makes it easier to access that whole state.
It's interesting you say that. This is a little bit of an aside, but in the Christian world, this Sunday is Pentecost. And so I talked about the quote unquote the Holy Spirit last night, but I connected it to the vibration of Om.
Absolutely.
In our what we do before we go into silence, we do some kind of meditation mantra. And so I had us just chant Om through each one of the chakras together. And then for a while, we just continuously chanted Om. And you could just feel that we were tapping into a field of consciousness.
Yep.
And like you said, it's the same field of consciousness, that all the great saints, mystics have tapped into.
Right. Yeah.
And that doesn't take away the necessity to have an occasional dark night of the soul, but it
Right.
does it's enough to stabilize you so that you can really do the honest work that you have to do in looking at yourself and all the things that we have all avoided looking at, maybe for lifetimes.
Right. Right. When we talk about this idea of kind of attunement, we can think about this a little bit in a practical way too. And I don't know if you have noticed this. I'm pretty sure you have, but I know I have noticed this, that yes, when we read books by Yogananda, or when we think about a friend who is also probably on the spiritual path and generally very clear and responsible. I mean, I notice this when I meet with you on Zoom, when I hang out with you, other people of the same mindset, there's a mutual light and upliftment there.
Yes.
But the moment I start thinking about, like, maybe some other friends I have, they're caught up in some confusion and difficulty, it's very easy to kind of get pulled down into that. And most people don't realize that that's going on. And so that's why when they're around certain people, they tend to behave like them more. So I'm only bringing that up because I think that we need to recognize that, yes, there is the uplifting sense, but we really also need to be aware of who are we thinking about and attuning to at other times as well.
No, I've been actually teaching about this a lot in the last 4 or 5 weeks at the Assisi Institute. And you've heard me use this quote from Roy before, but I think there's multiple levels to the quote. Roy told me once, never forget that you're always a teacher. Now, I don't think he was saying, in fact, I know he wasn't saying pontificate 24 hours a day.
Right.
I think what he was saying is keep your awareness, the state of your consciousness high. Don't forget who you are, what you are, what your purpose is in the world. Because if you do, then what you're saying is true. You just merge with the strong energy field around you
Right.
rather than being the strong energy field, not because you're preaching, teaching, right? Just holding that energy. You again, I'll quote Roy, he would say, abide in yourself. You're abiding in your soul, yourself, but then you're also, chances are you're going to have a positive effect on the environment, and either people will be drawn to you or they'll be repelled.
Right.
But at least you're not going to be drawn into their energy field. And the other thing is, every legitimate teacher from every tradition, in some way, shape, or form, says, stay awake, stay
Yeah.
awake. And what I've been just trying to say to people is, every time, and I know there's so much craziness in the world and it's easy, I get that. But, every time you get overly engaged in the news or you get overly engaged in some sort of political agita, you don't realize, but you're losing energy. Your state of your consciousness is in a state of decline. And why don't you stay awake so you can notice it and you can choose another direction? It's not analyzing yourself to death, it's just, or judging yourself, it's just staying awake, because even our thoughts they're things, and they have their own energy charge, negative or positive.
Right.
And I always tell people, you can't always choose the first thought, but you can choose how you're going to respond to that thought, and you can choose a contrary thought
Right.
or action.
Absolutely. Yeah. So with all that, to come back around to the idea of psychological well-being and health, this I believe this is probably a difficult thing to speak to. I don't think we can speak to it in a way that's going to make sense to everybody, but hopefully we'll do our best here. So you had a relationship with Roy Eugene Davis.
Right.
I had a relationship with Roy Eugene Davis. And probably you too, when I was around Mr. Davis, I felt elevated.
Yep.
When he spoke, even if he was dismissing something silly that I was saying, I never felt that I was being dismissed. I felt like I was having a relationship with someone, and it was very meaningful. And even when it wasn't necessarily, we weren't seeing eye to eye, it didn't matter, because it's just like when you have a brother, someone that's your brother. You can disagree and you can wrestle, but you're still brothers and you still love each other, right? Same thing with parents. If you've got a good relationship with a parent. But not everyone saw Roy that way, just like probably not everyone saw Yogananda that way. And sometimes I wonder, what gets in the way of someone saying, oh yeah, that's just a tall fellow, wearing a plaid shirt that thinks he knows what he's talking about, and so I'm not going to pay a whole lot of attention to him, versus someone maybe like me or you who feels like, okay, I really need to listen to what he is saying. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah. No, I do. There's a saying in India, I'm sure you've heard it: when the pickpocket meets the saint, he only sees his pockets.
Right.
Um, and again, it goes back to, why is somebody choosing, we'll just use Roy as an example, to go down to Roy's for a retreat?
Mm-hmm.
Are they looking merely to escape from their suffering,
Right.
which is natural, but in that escapist kind of way? And are they looking for somebody that's going to tickle their ears or validate their prejudices about the spiritual life and life itself?
Right.
Or are they really ready to be a disciple? Are they
Right.
really ready to be a student? And even in my own life, every time I feel like I go down to a deeper level of realization, it's like I will say to myself, I didn't know I was hanging on to this stuff.
Right.
I didn't know how arrogant I was. I didn't know how defensive I was. So you have, and there's levels and levels of that. I think if you're truly ready and you want do you want what you want or do you want the truth?
Right. Right.
Then you will ride those waves. And maybe I'll give a little critique of sometimes how, not Kriya Yoga per se, but how spirituality is presented in the culture. Um, it's almost a transactional relationship. People hop on a spiritual path because, again, it's going to take away their pain, and if they do it right, they'll attract their soulmate, they'll attract a lot of money. I had a conversation with someone a couple weeks ago, and God's a funny word. So if people find a better word that fits them, higher power, or whatever, I'm fine with that. But this person kept on using the word source, and I get that, and at one level that's true. It's accurate, it's describing. But I came back. I said, so what does source demand of you?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know what you're demanding of source. It's okay, but what is source demanding of you?
Right.
And so I think it takes a real ripeness to approach Kriya Yoga, to approach a teacher, and to really be willing to be challenged and to be uncomfortable.
Right. And that brings me back to the idea of the psychological well-being of, if a person has focused on their psychological well-being first, it's more likely that when they approach a saint, they're going to see a saint and not his pockets. Because, if you're looking just for their pockets, well, clearly there's an issue there, a psychological issue of, lack or needing to steal things, which is not psychologically necessary, right? And how have you found, or have you found a way to encourage people to try that, to see that? Because I usually get, initially, when I bring up the whole psychological health and well-being, I initially get a lot of resistance. People say, oh, well, that's not why I'm here spiritually. And then usually either 6 months or a year later, if the students are still around, they'll say grudgingly, well, I decided to go try out a counselor and a therapist, and you're kind of right. That made a huge difference in my meditation practice. That made a huge difference in how I was able to experience life. So how have you approached that?
Well, yeah, I try to present the bigger picture that as human beings, we are multidimensional. We have a physical body, we have emotions, we have a psyche, a psychological psyche, and then who we really are is the self and the soul. When people come to me and they want spiritual teaching, I express to them that we are multidimensional beings. We have a physical body. We're not the body, but we have a body, and it impacts our psychological state. We have emotions. We have a psyche that can be healthy or unhealthy, and who we really are is the soul, is the Atman, is the divine image. But we bring all that other stuff with us, and it's not ancillary. It's you bring it with you, and if you haven't again dealt with it, and you're not willing to explore it, then it's going to get in the way. It's going to create shadows that keep you from seeing the divinity that is within you,
Right.
that is you.
Right.
I think it was St. John of the Cross. He's a Catholic mystic and saint. He said it this way: next to the knowledge of God, nothing is more important than the knowledge of yourself. And not just the spiritual knowledge, but at all those levels.
Right.
I was in counseling from the time I was 20 until 45.
Right.
And then I married my wife, who's a therapist, so I wouldn't have to pay for it.
Right.
So you have to be willing to embrace that. And, most of the people read the autobiography of a yogi, and I say, go to the chapter of Yogananda living with Sri Yukteswar. And the metaphor that Yogananda used is that every diseased tooth was being pulled from his mouth without Novocaine.
Right.
That sooner or later you have to go through that process.
Yeah. Yeah. One interesting thing, we might have talked about this before, and maybe you have a little more awareness about it than I do. In fact, you probably do. One of my friends, a fellow that I play music with, he's an Eastern Orthodox Christian, and one time we had a conversation, and he was saying that the way that they see the human spiritual situation is not that we need saved, but that we are wounded and we do need healed, spiritually speaking. That part of the whole life process is not saving anyone. It's about sort of healing this internal wound. And I guess I'm kind of contradicting myself about spirituality being healing or not. But are you familiar with that idea?
Yeah. And Jesus never really used the language of saving souls. I don't think you can find one statement of him in the Gospels that he came to save souls. So,
Right.
yeah, I don't think it's not about, from a kind of a mystical Christian perspective, it's not about saving souls. I'll say it at two levels. It's ultimately about uncovering that divine image and the innate relationship we have with God, with the absolute, and having that emerge in our consciousness. But in order for that to happen, there is a healing that has to take place.
Mm-hmm.
And spirituality can be part of, maybe this is the fine line. Spirituality, the relationship with the guru, etc., is all part of that. But it doesn't take away, and I think this is where the healing comes in. It doesn't take away our need to face our shadows and to
Right.
really confront them. And the teacher, spiritual community, all the spiritual practices can give us the strength to do that, but we have to decide that we're willing to face our shadows.
Right.
I think the grace comes that will enable us to do that, allow us to do that, but we have to make that decision ourselves, and it's the combination of our choice to take responsibility for our lives and ourselves and our wounds, along with grace, divine energy, Shakti, that allows us to do that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's definitely more nuanced then, in that we do have to have a level of well-being and health and stability in order to actually engage the spiritual process. But then it's as if the spiritual process gives us a little more perspective and clarity to sort of finish the job, I guess.
Yeah, and I would, yes, but I would add a word. It gives us, this has been my own experience. And this is where my bhakti nature will come out. What helps me even to face my shadow, those things I don't want to look at, those painful pieces, those little painful vortexes of unresolved energy, etc., inside of me, is having an intuition, and I'll say it in a non-bhakti way, then I'll say it in a bhakti way, that being itself is good.
Mm-hmm.
That beingness is good. And if you say it in a more devotional way, that God is goodness. One of my favorite quotes is from Francis. He says, God is good, only good, all good. Now, what do you mean by good? And you get a whole nother discussion, but there's my sense of that I can trust beingness.
Right.
I can trust reality with an uppercase R.
Right.
That it is good and I am part and parcel of it. I'm not separate from it. Okay, then I can let go and face what I have to face.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of two things. Number one, in the Yoga Sutras, there's this idea, the statement that spiritual practice doesn't make the oneness state appear, or in meditation, spiritual practice does not make samadhi appear, that it's like a farmer irrigating a ditch. The water just flows after you've dug the ditch. And
Yes.
then in Sankhya philosophy, there's the idea of prakriti, or we could call divine mother, nature, everything that we experience. And in that philosophy, it essentially says that everything exists for the illumination of Purusha, or for the illumination of spirit, which means everything exists for them.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's a pretty profound, I don't know if you'd say extreme statement. I could be looked at as a very extreme statement.
Well, let me share another experience I had in India. The last 4 or 5 days we were in Varanasi, where Lahiri Mahashaya is from. And we couldn't get into his house, but there's a temple dedicated to him. And it has become, I don't know if I'll ever go back there, but one of my favorite places in the whole world. And there's a little side altar chapel within it to Babaji. And they have this life-size statue of Babaji meditating.
Yeah.
And the vibrations, I went there and it was like, wow. And there are no words that can put it. It wasn't even, I mean, there were some emotions, but it wasn't like, oh, isn't this wonderful and beautiful? And I cried. It was just like, whatever Babaji is, I got an intuition of it.
Right.
And it didn't, again, take me out of my challenges, but what I found is it has given me the courage to look at them more deeply.
Right. Yeah.
Like, this is really real. Everything that, Roy Yogananda said, it is like real. And I'm feeling like I'm a part of it. In fact, might be a little bit of heresy from my Catholic friends, but so the first day the first day we all went Swami, and then Judith and I would go every day there. But the first day we were there, I was sitting and meditating, and the gentleman, I don't think he was a Swami, who oversaw the Lahiri temple, when I was in front of, again, the statue of Babaji, he came and brought, what are they, the blessed food in the Hindu tradition, what do they call that?
Prasad?
Yeah, he came, and it was a piece of sweet bread, and he just put it in my mouth. Almost didn't ask me. And it was like, and this is my Catholic version of it. It's like, this is like really freaking Holy Communion. The whole experience. But my point is, it didn't take me out of the struggle.
Right.
It just, I knew I was connected to something larger and bigger than my egoic self.
Right.
Which then gave me the courage to look at my egoic self.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives you the ability to do it. And I like that, what you're saying there. And I don't know if you've seen this as well, but a lot of times when we think about psychological well-being, what people are looking to do is often put an end to everything. Like they just want, the pain to stop, everything to stop, right? Rather than accept that life is up and down. And what if the things that were coming your way weren't you just trying to stay away from it all the time? What if it was you just riding a wave, recognizing that, oh, I can handle this, if you have that sense of not greatness, but connection to something greater, you don't feel like a little bug getting ready to get squished every time. Yep. You feel like an expression of something more profound moving through time and space.
No, absolutely. That the self that we really are is huge. Yeah. And it's connected in one with that, capital uppercase T. And yeah, I think, the egoic personality will go, oh my God. One of the things, I have a set of foster parents that I went to live with when I was 16, and they treat me like I'm one of their own children. They're beautiful people, very devout Catholics. But they're in their upper 80s. And every time I see them, and particularly my foster father was the most vital person, he was my hero in that sense, that he could do anything, never stopped. He had this endless energy. And to watch, his mind is still good, but to watch his body really failing him. Mm-hmm. But I think, all right, I may be 88 someday. Take a deep breath, and it's okay. It'll be okay. Yeah. Not the end of the world. And I'm not going to necessarily like it, but it's going to be okay. Right.
Yeah. So it's almost as if the healing of this process is really the embracing of the natural expression of life, the natural cycles of life.
Yes. Let me say it this way. I think this is the difference between a sort of psycho-spiritual synthesis and just psychology. we have to face all of our psychological wounds and pains and feelings sooner or later. And if we stay with the spiritual life long enough, we meditate deeply, it's all going to come up.
Yeah.
The difference is Sigmund Freud said that all that psychoanalysis does is take you from extraordinary suffering to ordinary suffering. That's all it does.
Okay.
Okay. And when I talk about a psycho-spiritual synthesis, you have to face that pain, but you face it eventually in the context of this field of consciousness, uppercase C.
Yeah.
And I do think that when you face it with some sort of intuitive awareness of larger consciousness, larger being, consciousness, uppercase C, you still have to face it and you still have to feel it, but it becomes much more manageable. And I do think over time, by facing it with this larger consciousness, then that larger consciousness and light can have the effect of eventually dissolving the knots, but you still have to face the knots.
Right.
And you can't make some spiritual, and when I was a practicing psychotherapy, we would call it the flight into mental health. You can't just, oh, okay, yeah, I got a shadow, but I'm the Atman, and there's no flight into spiritual mental health. It's that process of opening those dark pockets. I don't mean dark by evil, those things in ourselves that we don't want to face, by opening it to the light of consciousness.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It seems like there's, again, so much more that we could say about that.
Yes. Let me just share one more thought that
absolutely.
I have to face in my life and other people have to face in my spiritual life. What are the psychological, ideological beliefs that maybe serve me in an egoic way to help me get through some trauma, or not feel the trauma when I couldn't face it? But what are the sacred cows in terms of my beliefs?
Right.
That, not that I have to shed them all, but I at least have to be willing to examine, my prejudices in the light of a larger consciousness.
Right.
I'll give you an example. People will come to me and they will say, well, people here are suffering. Oh, it's so horrible. And I have two responses. We have to have compassion for people that are suffering. And if we have the ability to help and relieve it, we do. We don't turn a blind eye towards, any kind of suffering and injustice. However, when I say this to people, they don't. In fact, one person used to come to me for spiritual direction and quit. I said, you can't say karma works in one place and doesn't work in another place. You can't say you have karma and nobody else has karma. And again, that doesn't mean that we don't help. And it was like, well, how can you say it's their karma? And well, because it is.
Right.
I found that for people, that's a sacred cow. It's like you bring up the word karma when they don't like the word karma and they get angry with you.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't have any solutions for that either. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, well, I think we've come to the end of our time today. So I want to thank you for being here, and everything that you've shared has been, well, very interesting to me and probably extremely helpful to our audience too.
It's been interesting for me too. Helpful for me too.
Yeah. And is there anything else you'd like to say about the upcoming retreat, the July 14th through 18th retreat?
No, there's still room for it. It really, it's one of our favorite things to do every summer.
Yeah.
Again, with you, Swami Nirvanananda, Gayatri coming from Sicily. It's really a wonderful time to be together. And Sri Yukteswar wrote someplace that at least once a year, if you can take like 7 days off or a chunk of time and just really devote yourself to spiritual practice, being around people moving in the same direction, it really is a wonderful experience. So I think our website is cc-org. If you want to register.
Assisi-institute.org.
Yeah, Assisi-institute.org.
Yeah.
And if you go to our website, it will tell you how to register. But I would just really encourage you to come.
Yeah, me too. Me too. As you said, it's always a beautiful time. And even being a teacher in that event, I personally always come away with many, many weeks and sometimes months of more inspiration afterwards.
Yeah, it's good. It's
Yeah.
good. It's kind of like one big satsang.
Absolutely. Yes, that makes good. Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, good.
It was good seeing you, and
Right.
it was wonderful talking to you.
Honor you, Ryan, for all the work you do. You do tremendous work. This new book on the yamas and the niyamas. You are a true servant. You're a true student of Roy and his work, and you do a wonderful job carrying on his mission.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Peace.
God bless. Thank you.
You too.